deal with the subject titled How to Defend the Human Rights During the Period of the Pandemic. And our question is, dare to defend the human rights during a pandemic or not? All of us know that the COVID-19 pandemic and the state responses to it represent a set of new challenges and threats at the same time for those who advocate for human rights. In April 2020, we found that Amnesty International organization urged states to ensure that they include human rights defenders in their management of the crisis, as they play a major role in ensuring that the measure applied respecting the human rights. We found also that the Amnesty International organization also called on them not to use the restrictions linked to the pandemic as a pretext for further reduce civic space and suppress dissidents and human rights defenders. Despite these warnings, and the commitments made by the international community more than 2 decades ago to protect and recognize the right to safeguard human rights, there are threats and attacks and also grave infractions that continue to target these rights in the midst of pandemic. Therefore, our dilemma here is how to defend human rights during the period of pandemic. We can find that states have taken decisions to stem the spread of the virus, some of which have impacted various human rights, including freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly, sometimes beyond what was strictly necessary and proportionate to the protection of the public health. Some countries are using the restrictions due to the pandemic as a pretext to continue to work to reduce civic space and crack down on critics and human rights defenders, or simply to silence those concerned about the management of human rights by the authorities. There are common measures include the passing of law criminalizing the dissemination of fake news in flagrant violation of the right of the freedom of the expression, which has led to the prosecution of many journalists and bloggers and has had a chilling effect on the general public. Since the start of the pandemic in China, we found that numerous cases have been reported of independent journalists and activists harassed by the authorities for disseminating information about the virus on social media and denigrating the government's response to the crisis. We have some examples here. We found that among those affected are outspoken lawyer and citizen journalist Chin Quishi, who claimed to have been harassed by the authorities after posting video filmed in Wuhan hospital, and Li Wenling, a Chinese doctor reprimanded by police in Wuhan for trying to spread the first warning about the new coronavirus, from which he died in February. We found also in the United States there have been several cases of employers preventing caregivers from speaking out about their working condition by resorting to reprisals, including harassment, disciplinary proceeding, and wrongful dismissals. For example, caregiver Tainika Samvril was fired in April from Bridgeview Health Center in Cook County 2 days after filming herself live on Facebook, reading aloud a petition signed by her and her colleague in the same office to denounce the lack of personal protective equipment on the premises. For all of that, I'd like here to mention the situation also of India. Uh, we found that after the India Supreme Court gave orders to decognized prisoners to stem the spread of COVID-19, we found that thousands of prisoners have been released. However, many women human rights defenders who should never been detained in the jail remain in the jail until now. We can mention Safora Zargar, a pregnant activist who was protesting against legislation that discriminates against Muslims, has been held in pretrial detention for 2 months under the draconian law on prevention of illegal activities, which is being hijacked to look up government cities and women human rights defenders. For all of that, I'd like to recommend that all times, including serious crises such as COVID-19, human rights defenders should be viewed as trusted allies who are allowed to conduct their activities in safety without undue restrictions. And also, I'd like to mention here the citation as the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights said in April, at every stage of this epidemic, including during the recovery efforts, must be made to involve national human rights institutions, civil society activists, and human rights defenders. Those who have long been involved in economic and social rights, urban communities, and vulnerable groups such as indigenous people have learned much that can benefit all decision makers in our days. That's all, and thank you very much